I am so excited to have our guest, Michele Rigby Assad, today. Michele is a former undercover CIA officer, counterterrorism expert, and best-selling author of Breaking Cover. With over a decade of experience working in the Middle East, she's navigated some of the world's most dangerous regions, all while breaking barriers as a woman in the intelligence field. Now, as a sought-after speaker, consultant, and advocate for resilience, Michele inspires audiences to embrace courage and find purpose in life's challenges. Welcome and wow.
Well, thank you, Denise. That's so lovely what you said. I'm very honored by your words.
I feel like you and I could just talk for hours. We have an interesting history together because you're a speaker. I am in the speaker industry. I've been have been since 2018, and we have worked together throughout those years in different capacities, and it's always been a lot of fun. I love everything that you do.
And it's so nice when your professional relationships turn into long-term friendships, and so I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into your story, I did a fun exercise with ChatGPT, which we at the Counter Life call Chad. So we have a name. We have a name for him that I wanted to share with you and our listeners. You have not heard this before, but I wanted to pull a few descriptive phrases that we thought reflect your expertise and unique skill set.
Oh boy, let's hear it.
Okay. So, intuition architect.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Resilience strategist.
Okay, I like that. Yep.
Purpose pathfinder. Undercover storyteller. A courage cultivator. A crisis navigator, and a faithful trailblazer.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's very interesting. I wonder where it pulled all that from, but
I don't know, but Chad and I did good.
I'll take all of that.
I thought that you might like those.
Those are cool.
I can definitely see that all of those in you for sure. But
that's really my purpose and passion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, let's just dive right in because I have so many questions, and I know listeners are going to really love your story. It's so unique and something different. Every entrepreneur and business owner has a different and unique story. Yours is kind of way out there in terms of being unique. But for those listeners who don't know, you grew up small town, middle of Florida, and then somehow land in the CIA as an undercover intelligence officer. How does that happen?
I know, it's ridiculous. I had such simple beginnings. I had a loving family, but really small town. I mean, Florida's grown a lot, but when I was a little kid, it was very rural. I didn't know anything about the world. My parents didn't know anything about the world. I wasn't in, special schools prep schools or anything like that. I didn't even know the CIA was real. Like, I didn't even know that was a real job. So, I think that getting into the CIA was just the result of cumulative steps out of my comfort zone, seeking adventure and learning. And so little things that I did, like, right after I graduated high school, I went on my first trip to the Middle East, which was a mission trip to an orphanage for a month. My friends were like partying and drinking, and I was like sweating it out in Egypt, like laying concrete walkways for kids and painting beds. And so I think that's the first like crazy step I took. And then it was studying abroad for a semester in Egypt and Israel as an undergrad, followed by studying Arabic on my own, followed by getting into Georgetown, into their master's in Arab studies, which pre-9/11 didn't mean a whole lot to anyone. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of all these little things that I did that were just really different and off the beaten path, Well, it set the stage for me to get recruited by the CIA out of Georgetown. Who knew? Like, I couldn't have created that path for myself. I certainly never envisioned it. And so it's a surprise to me, just as much as the people who know me.
That's crazy.
I know.
Was your family like shocked?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they were shocked. They were scared. I mean, every time I did something new and different. I mean, I remember my first trip to the Middle East, to the orphanage, was just months after the first Gulf War. So, and for Americans who don't know the Middle East, I can't believe that my parents let me go. And then we had a mission trip to Russia and Ukraine in 1993 after the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, that was, like, we're some of the first Americans Russians had ever seen and Ukrainians had ever seen.
Wow.
My parents, amazingly, just kept saying yes, even though it scared them and they didn't quite understand, but they're like, I mean, why would we say no? So yeah, my family was shocked, and I got into the CIA, and I really had to explain what I could. And they just had to, like, put me in God's hands and just say, like, there's not a lot we can do except we will pray for you, for your safety, and be there for you as much as we can. But life, yeah.
I think that too, like back in 1993, in that time frame, I mean, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all of these things to really like instill all the fear because we didn't know. And
Really? We didn't know how dangerous it was. Like,
yeah,
my
exactly.
parents pick up a phone and call me in Egypt. Like, back then, you didn't have means of communication that were reliable or not super expensive. So, I mean, you didn't have digital books, and you didn't have WhatsApp, and you didn't have social media. You didn't have anything. So all those trips that I took, I look back now and I was like, man, well, that was pretty courageous. Like, I'm kind of impressed with my earlier self.
You should be.
I don't know if I could do a lot of that now, but yeah, do those crazy hard things when you're young.
So when you got into the CIA, what were you actually doing?
So I was a part of the clandestine service. So that's the part of the CIA that you see in Hollywood movies. You know, those are the people that are on the streets, recruiting and meeting with sources and gathering the intelligence that our government needs to make good decisions. And so I was part of that cadre of officers sent abroad to do exactly that. So I had 5 overseas tours, some war zones, some not war zones, but really dangerous places. So suffice it to say, they were some really tough places. And I was focused on the counterterrorism mission because my experience was in the Arab world. And very specifically, my job was called a collection management officer. So they put females into this role back then, which is right behind the case officer who handles the sources. And you're the one helping them manage the collection of that intelligence, vet it, and then distribute it to the community. So my husband was like a case officer. I was a collection management officer until several years into my CIA career, when I was finally allowed the opportunity to get in front of terrorists and insurgents and be able to interact with them directly, debrief them for intelligence. And then that for me was life altering because it was such a amazing experience. And it turns out not only was I good at it, I was really good at it, which I mean, you don't know till you try. And I was finally let out of that box, and it was just now we've got the fruit of 2 books here as a result of that.
Yes. Well, and we're going to get to that. How, when you would go into like meetings with these terrorists, you had to have been like terrified. Was your heart like pounding? How do you overcome the fear of that? Because I would imagine that level, that fear also flows into now how you manage business.
Yeah. So for me, because I understood those guys and I understood the ideology, I wasn't fearful, and they were in very controlled conditions. So there wasn't any fear for personal security most of the time. But what I had was like, I was trembling, I was sweating, I was shaking, I was nervous because I understood the challenge that I, as a female officer, had that like my husband and my other male colleagues did not have. And that is, I'm
Mhm.
about to walk into the room with a guy who thinks that I'm unsophisticated. It's inappropriate for me to even leave my home, never mind be in a foreign country, involved in, you know, the dangerous, messy world of terrorism and insurgency and ethnic cleansing. And so you know, how do you get a guy like that to respect you enough to engage in that conversation and do your job? Because they have zero respect. And they,
Mhm.
in fact, think of you as a fun plaything, like, oh, wow, I'm in the room with a woman who's not covered. Like, this is the ultimate no-no in their terrorist ideology. So for me, it was like, I have to do this job. It's really important because we're saving lives by gathering this intel. But I know what this guy thinks of me. And somehow I have to get him over this misconceptions that he has of me. And I need to establish authority and respect, and got to do it fast because I got to get the job done. So it was kind of the burden of like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And then after I did it the first time, and I did it so well, I shocked myself. I was like, dude, that's a high that I need to replicate. So I just tried to get in and deal with as many terrorists as I could, which was so fascinating and so interesting. Then it became for me like, okay, let's see how long it takes me to get this guy on my side. It's like a big
Mhm.
challenge, and it was so fun.
Did the guys that like your counterparts, were they like, wow, we can't believe that she just did that the first time?
So, you know, my husband always believed in me, and he always pushed me forward. And for that, like, I'll always be grateful. Like, he knew I could do things before I knew I could do them. But then other people would realize, like, actually, you're really good at this. So do you mind come in and debriefing my source, because I've been trying to get this intel from him and he just will not give it to me. Like, I know he's got it, but for whatever reason he's holding back. So it was cool because then I became the special officer that's brought in when there's a problem and the guy's not talking and you got to try another strategy. So that was so fun. I love it. I love being able to crack the code. And it usually is like figuring out who is the guy across the table from me. Because unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues would forget that each person is an individual, and they would just deal with them like a terrorist is a terrorist is a terrorist. It's just not true. Everybody's
Mhm.
motivated, has different motivations. Everybody has different education level. So you got to interact with them very differently. And when you stop doing that, they know you don't know what you're doing. But when you can like crack the code of like, okay, I know who you are, I know how to talk to you, and I know how to get you on my side, and that's and it worked.
Wow.
It's kind of
So
like sales.
you,
You know, you have to know your customer, and if you start treating all your customers like they're just another customer, you're not going to be able to sell well.
that's really good. Um, so you were a real spy,
Yes, yes.
a real life spy.
Maybe not as exciting and interesting as people will see in the movies, but there
Wow.
definitely were a lot of crazy experiences in that lifestyle.
Well, what was the most challenging aspect of transitioning from a CIA officer to carving out your own path as an author, speaker, and consultant?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so hard. So hard because when you work for the government, short of like spying for the Russians, you can't get fired. Like, you literally, you could be the worst officer in the world. You're never going to lose your job. So that safety and security of a government job is very difficult to leave. And then if you're from the CIA or you're in the intelligence bubble, you just spent 10 years of your life. You have no resume. You can't tell anyone what you've done really for 10 years. And you have no idea how your skills translate to the civilian world, or what you're worth, or what you can do, or what people are going to pay you to do. It's like the
Mhm.
biggest question mark, and it's super scary. I'm telling you, like, I I was so intimidated by it, but yet in my heart, like, I knew I had a new mission, and I knew that I was called to do something outside the CIA. So that calling was so strong that I pushed through that fear and was like, you know what, I'm just gonna have to figure this out. And my husband and I have to figure this out because we both left after 10 years at the same time. So there was a lot of trepidation, and it takes a long time to establish yourself. I mean, my God, as an entrepreneur, building your own business, that never happens overnight. I mean, maybe some people are lucky enough. That's just never been me. And so being able to save up, we had very robust savings because we're working in war zones, getting all this extra danger pay. And so we had a very nice, we didn't have to worry about too much the funds, the finances of our lives as we're establishing our business. Thank God.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important. It's really hard to make a huge change if you don't have some sort of financial stability.
Right.
Yeah, because it takes so long, especially when you are doing something so extreme, from being an overseas counterterrorism officer to being a civilian consultant / speaker / author. Like, it was an act of God, really, to do all those things.
Well, and because you're so limited on what you can share and say, I mean, that's got to really be tough. I can't even imagine how you go about like building your personal brand when you are required to be anonymous.
Yeah, because these days people want you to already be established in your platform, which means your social media. And I mean, I had no platform because I was undercover, and I kept saying, you guys, that's the point. That's the entire point, that I was undercover. Now I'm not. And so if you can get on board with my mission, then we can work together on speaking or the production of a book. But I had to find very, very special people who are willing to get off the X of the comfort zone, see who I am, what I'm trying to achieve, and are willing to invest in me. Those people were hard to find, but I eventually did find them. But it just took a while. You said, you get what you're doing. We believe in you, and we're here to help you, push you forward, and support you.
Do you feel like your first book, Breaking Cover, really helped start building your social platform, your speaking career?
Yes.
Was that kind of the first step in moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's the funniest thing. You basically, in this culture, if you have a book, then suddenly you have something to say. But you're like, I'm still the same person I was before I had the book. But no, if for some reason that book offers some sort of legitimacy or proof of authority to speak on an issue and a topic. So when I finally was able to get that book out, it did bust open the opportunities finally. Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. And it's an amazing book that really goes into a lot more detail about your life as an agent and some of the things, amazing, miraculous things that you and your husband have done. How did your faith during this transition continue to influence the work you do today?
Yeah, my faith for me was critical because what we were doing was so audacious that I needed to rely on something other than myself. Like, if it's just life is all up to me, forget it. Like, I don't trust myself, and I know I don't know enough. But if I have faith that something greater than me is in charge of my life, and if I can hang in there long enough, the path will be presented to me. That in between space, which a lot of entrepreneurs, you know what I'm talking about. You're neither here nor you're there. You're in the dreaded in betweens, is what I call them. When you're trying so hard to make something happen and you just can't seem to get there. Like, faith for me was all that I had to hang on and persevere through that, like the moments of like doubt and is this ever going to happen? And faith that I was going to be able to use what I had learned in the service of a greater cause. That was, what got me out of bed every day. Like, it's worth it this pain and this struggle is worth it if at the end of the day, I can do something that's going to help somebody else on their journey. Because I'm just easy like that. That's who I am. That's my constitution. That's what motivates me. It's not money. It's not being well known. It's about really empowering others to be what they're called to be.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about that a lot from the stage as a speaker. What would you say that your main message is to your audiences?
One of the main messages is the need to persevere. Like, I think, and it's getting worse in our culture. I mean, my generation, your generation was one where we kind of expected to struggle. Like, you just knew you had to go in at the bottom level and work your way up. And this is just what we did. Well, now the younger generations are being fed a narrative that you've got to find hacks. You've got to get there quickly, or why even bother? Things need to happen fast. I mean, the idea of having to struggle for something, people are really essentially getting the message: if it hurts, give up, quit.
Yeah.
And that's anathema to success. That is an anathema to meaning. It will not happen if you're not willing to put in the time, to struggle to figure things out, to do things that are difficult. Like, there's nothing, for instance, you can't become an amazing counterterrorism officer if you don't serve in a war zone. You can't become an expert on counterintelligence if you haven't dealt with double agents and liars and fabricators and people who are dirty and deceiving. And I mean, you only know war because you've been in the trenches. And the only way to get there is by serving in the Iraqs and the Afghanistans of the world. You can't get that in Paris and Rome. And these days we're heading towards things are changing. But the bottom line is you have to be willing to scare yourself in order to do something purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
Because
that's really good. Yeah.
Don't happen in the comfort zone. They just don't.
Yeah. Do you still stay on top of all of the intelligence, like what's going on around the world? I know you and I talk about this sometimes, but it's always fun to hear your perspective on things.
The shop talk in our house is it's all about Middle East and Russia and terrorism and China and counterintelligence. Like, this is what we talk about all the time. So we're always monitoring the press, and it's nice because then sometimes I get to do TV pieces or podcasts where I'm asked about, breaking events. And I love that stuff. So fun. It's such an interesting part of the world, such a challenge to understand it well. And I love being able to kind of dumb it down for the American brain, because I know what I didn't know. And so I can kind of deconstruct things so people can understand it more easily.
Yeah.
Using my English, but easier. Yeah.
Well, because you have been on the backside of it all.
Yeah.
Which I think helps bring it forward too. Those of us who don't, we only hear what the news tells us, or, if we start digging and reading, then we can maybe learn more and understand it more. But it is complicated. It's so complicated.
And then if you don't have personal experience on the ground, then you're not able to see the spin. But when you've been on the ground, people, you've experienced these things, you're like, oh, okay, that's spin, that's political, and so you can read everything and kind of cut through the noise and the nonsense easier. Mm-hmm. And that it's hard if you haven't spent a lot of time in the region.
So I think that is probably why you guys are so great as security consultants, because your company works primarily with clients in the Middle East, and you have to really understand the nuance of that part of the world. So I can totally see how that would be such a great segue into that industry or that niche, because there's probably not a lot of security consultants who do that type of work.
There are not a lot of people who have in-depth knowledge of the Arab world. And then there are certain parts of the Arab world that are very difficult to understand because their culture is so opaque to outsiders. And so it is very difficult unless you're dealing with locals a lot to understand what's happening. And so our niche is that we're usually called on. We have a boutique consulting firm when foreigners working in places like the Gulf Arab region run into trouble and have issues, which happens a lot. And so when there is communication required with senior government officials like in Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or Bahrain or wherever, we're the folks that we can do that, and we can help like iron out problems or find a solution or settlement or things like that. But we're usually like that last ditch call. We're the few people that they can reach out to try to bring to resolution in messy situations.
Interesting. Well, I know that you are highly skilled at spotting liars and vetting, which I think is such an amazing skill to have, not only in your like interpersonal like life with other people, but also just successfully managing business or businesses and then helping people understand and learn that skill as well. So leaders can really know the people that they're bringing in at the top levels of their organizations. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think about the fact that, especially if you are in leadership positions or you are in HR, you kind of have to be a little bit of a spy in the sense of, when I say that, you have to be very quick at assessing people. Like if you're making major decisions for your company and you're interacting with other leaders or investors or whatever, like you've got to figure people out fast in order to make good decisions. So you're reading body language, you're trying to vet claims. Same with HR and in hiring. You got to figure out who people really, really are. And that is a really difficult thing to do. So it's really fun when I can help train HR officials or do leadership training where you teach them how to read body language, how to ask questions, what to look for, what do people do when they're lying, and how does that come off in a meeting. And it's a fascinating process. And actually, you can learn it pretty quickly.
What are some of the fails that you've seen, like failures for leaders who have not done vetting, who didn't understand the reading body language and kind of the red flags?
Okay, so it's funny, but I tell people you usually see the red flag and you usually dismiss it. And they don't even realize. I'm like, your biggest problem is that you've seen them and then you're like, oh no, I didn't really see that. Or, oh, I'm sure it's really not what I think it is. My gut tells me. People usually see the red flags, but they don't have the courage to do something about that or to honor that. You can call it intuition or the supercomputer brain that works faster than we even understand, like honor that, have the courage to stick with that and explore it more. The other thing too, is people don't ask follow-up questions. They take what other people say as gospel. And I mean, the first thing I learned in the Middle East is never trust anything anyone says, because a lot of the times in these cultures, they don't want to say something that's disagreeable to your face. They're not being jerks. It's just, and we Americans think everybody is just like us, exactly like us. And we have a very limited worldview because we don't have experience. And I'm like, no, very different worldview. So you have to interrogate everything, especially when you're dealing with people's lives, jobs, the direction of your company, things like that, your family.
Finances.
Your finance, oh my gosh, yes. Especially your finances. I think when you're dealing with things this important, it really behooves you to do the best you can to learn how to ask good questions, how to interrogate the details, push for the details. And then I tell people, if you never ever get the details, that's your answer. If you've done everything you can to ask the questions and at the end of the day, you still got nothing, that's it. You got your answer.
Interesting.
They've been deflecting. Deflection is like one of the most powerful tools that liars and fabricators use. is to make you forget the question you asked, or to go off on a tangent, or to go over here. Oh, look at that bright shining light. Or they're the masters of deflection. So if you can recognize that process, it'll help you spot the red flags.
Do you feel like our current culture, when we ask questions, it's interpreted as being like confrontational?
Yes, we have to get past that.
I noticed that myself a lot. Like if you ask a question, they're like, why are you asking that? Like,
But see,
and
an
it's
honest
not,
person will be happy to answer the question. A dishonest person is going to ask, shocked and like, how dare you? No,
yeah,
an honest person has no problem with you digging.
that's true. It's
Yeah.
so true. That is such a good piece of business advice.
Yes.
It really is.
Be a little bit more forthright with our questions. And
Mhm. What advice would you give others considering like a major career shift, or someone who might be looking to start their own business or become an entrepreneur? What would be some advice that you would give them?
so the advice in my new book, Get Off the X, is very much trying to help people rewire the way they think. And the first thing is like, people tell me all the time after I've spoken on a stage or I've done training or whatever, man, I think I could have been a cool CIA officer, if I'd taken this other, made this other decision in my life. Or a lot of women are like, man, I think I could have done what you did. And then like, why don't you like, adopt that persona that you think that's adventurous side of yourself, the curious side of your personality, and tap into that. Why don't you look at your question of, career change or career path like a spy? Like adopt this
Mm,
persona. And when you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to start exploring your world, asking questions, interrogating people about paths and opportunities. Like if you think of yourself as a spy, my job is to learn as much as I can about the various options in front of me. It's so funny. That little mind shift is so powerful.
yeah, that's so true. Well, speaking of get off the X, which is the greatest like phrase ever, your new book, Get Off the X, really was born out of your first book,
Yes.
Breaking Cover. So tell us about that and tell us where and when people can get it.
Yeah, so my new book comes out on January 14th. And get off the X is a phrase that is used in intelligence, military, law enforcement. Get off the X really is referring to if you're ambushed or attacked, the site of that ambush is called the X. And it is hard to get off the X to try to save your life when you're in shock, when you don't know what's happening. I mean, your brain is like fighting to understand what's happening. And a lot of people freeze. They just go right to the freeze response. And we're taught if you freeze, you die. So your best chance of survival is to get off that X. And so I talked about that in my first book, Breaking Cover. It's chapter 8. It's called Get Off the X. It explains the entire concept, and it basically sets the stage. Like, this is a metaphor for life. It's not just about saving your literal life. It's about pushing yourself off the X of your comfort zone to do the things you're called to do. But we are held back because we freeze. We freeze because out of fear, uncertainty, like I don't know what to do. I'm so overwhelmed by all the choices, intimidation. We
Yep.
freeze and we don't do things that intrigue us, that are fascinating or interesting, or we have some sense we need to make a change to our life. And so Get Off the X is basically helping people both be inspired to make a change, but also giving them the tools, like the spy tools, to do it, to make it happen.
I love that. I cannot wait to get my hands on the book.
Yay. So
So
exciting.
people will be able to order it on Amazon.
Yeah, and wherever you would normally order a book, Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever you get your books, we have them in hard copy, hardcover copy and Audible, and my voice narrating. So that's cool.
Awesome. I didn't realize that. That's very cool.
Yes. And
Well,
digital, obviously, copies too.
so all the Kindle readers can get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, Denise, I feel like getting stuck, freezing is just part of the human condition. Like there's nothing wrong or bad about it. It happens to us all the time. It's what you do. It's what you do after you're stuck. If you just kind of give up, you're just going to live a very uneventful life with very limited purpose and meaning. And it applies to men, women, old, young, newly graduated, trying to figure out what they're supposed to do with their life, or newly retired. Like, okay, now what do I do? Or new empty nesters, or somebody who just lost their job, or they lost their spouse, or they, there's so many things that can land us on the X. Both internal obstacles, but also, like COVID landed us all, the whole world on the
Oh my
X.
gosh, yes. I mean, nobody saw that avalanche coming.
Right. It means a lot of things take us to the place where you're like, oh my gosh, things are changing. I'm frozen. I don't know what to do. And we just have to get really good at pushing through the fear, pushing through the resistance to change, to move ourselves off that terrible X.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to live a mediocre life. No one wants a C life.
People go, I didn't realize I was doing that. But now that you brought it up, I think I have been shooting too low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd rather shoot higher and fail than just not try at all.
Me too. But I struggle too, like everyone. I think we get bogged down with imposter syndrome, or I'm not good enough, or people are going to laugh at me, or who's going to take me seriously. And
Yes.
I had a good friend one time say this to me. She's like, if you don't do it, someone else that is even less qualified than you will do it.
That is so good. That's so good.
And
It's
I
so
was
brilliant.
like, my mind was blown over that, because I'm like, you are so right.
It's very true. It's very true. Yeah. And I think sometimes, if you have a high level of emotional intelligence, that you understand the limits of your own knowledge. But there are people who don't have that and think very highly of themselves and are not as qualified. So it's almost like the more EI you have, the more imposter syndrome you have.
That is so true. I've never thought about it like that before.
And I really cemented for me when I was asked after Breaking Cover came out to go speak to Google. And I had what they call a book talk. And Google employees filled the room. They're like, we never see this kind of response. They're like, we want you to talk about imposter syndrome. I was like, at Google? I'm like, you people are the smartest people in the world. Are you kidding me? Like, you are engineers. You're like brainiacs. And they're like, no, we suffer the most from imposter syndrome. And I was like, wow, fascinating.
I'm shocked by that.
Right?
It
So
gives hope to all of us.
It's almost the more gifted you are, the more emotional intelligence you have, the more you realize, that you suffer with that, and you have to learn to push through it.
That's so good. Well, sometimes they say ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
There's some truth to that, I suppose. Well, Michele, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day today. We're going to wrap it up there, but I want people to know that they can learn more about you at micheleRigbyAssad.com. And you want to shout out your social handles so people can find you on social?
Yep, it's the 3-part name, Michele Rigby Assad. I have one L in Michele. But if you can't remember that, just put Michele CIA, do a search, it'll come up. And my website is very, very helpful for, for speaking, just for learning more, for learning about the books or ordering the books, like whatever, it's all there. It's a very robust website. So
it really is. You just went through a little bit of a brand refresh. I think it looks amazing. I was on there yesterday. It's a very nice website. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Boy, yeah, I appreciate that. Because as we know, as business owners, the amount of work it takes to put in just for a
Ugh,
website is
I know people
enormous.
have no idea.
Oh,
No
and if it's
idea.
not all, it looks like, oh yeah, that must have been easy. Good.
Yeah, no, that's not the case. Well, thank you so much. And maybe we'll get to do a part two sometime in 2025.
That's awesome. Let's do it, Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you.